The UDRcast is not affiliated and does not represent any 12-step fellowship. I, Bill Ward, the host of the UDRcast, will be sharing my experience and my journey of recovery. That does include, but is not limited to, the literature contained in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Our guests will be sharing their own path to recovery and what has worked for them. The UDRcast encourages and supports all paths to recovery. Welcome everybody to the UDRcast. UDR stands for Uncover, Discover, and Recover. My name is Bill Ward, and I'm coming to you from the recovery capital of Canada, Calgary, Alberta. Here we are going to discuss everything recovery, different perspectives, different experiences, both with the people I know and with others from around the world. If you resonate with anything you've heard on this episode today, we ask that you share it with anyone who you think may benefit from it. If you have any questions or comments, please find us at billward.life and send us a message in the info section. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you are interested in more recovery content, you can find the buttons for the YouTube channel and other social media outlets on the homepage, and you will be redirected to those platforms. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time. About fear is when you look up fear, sometimes you got to look for the right definitions as per the context. And this definition, it says moved, operated, or controlled by something. So the fear that we're driven by, it's usually a compelling, unseen force that actually pushes us. So what is the unseen force that is pushing us? Well, it's the instincts. Our instincts for validation. Our instincts for community with our peers. Our instincts for sex relation. Our instincts drive all the fears that we have. Okay? And fear is probably at the root of all of this. You know, there's a lot of alcoholics and addicts, including myself, that come in here and they have a hard time writing a fears list because they don't really think they're fearful of anything. Well, that's just the version of fear that you have given. But once you start understanding fear, you'll see that almost everybody, including yourself, is driven by fear. Okay? So let's read this bottom paragraph on page 67. Notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown and Mr. Jones and the employer and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was the evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It sets in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did we not ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. So going back to the beginning of the paragraph, the short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. And understanding that everything that we do is probably based in some kind of a fear. And it was the evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. And think of that. Think about the fabric of this shirt. The fabric of this shirt was shot through with fear. So the fabric of our existence is shot through with fear. It's like in the step 3 where it says our problems that we think arise out of ourselves. And I've always said that that's the instincts, and these problems arise out of the roots, which are the instincts, and it's typically based in a fear. And it's the same thing. The fabric of our existence, our problems we think arise out of ourselves, are kind of tied together. It sets in motion trains of circumstances that brought us misfortune we didn't deserve. And think of a train, right? And that's why they wrote that. It sets in motion trains of circumstances in your life that bring you misfortune that you feel like you didn't deserve that. But did we not ourselves set the ball rolling, right? So let's just use my daughter's example. You know, if I didn't have the program and I had done those lies and I got to that point and let's just say some guy and myself were talking, I'd be like, yeah, my fucking daughter's fucking mad at me again. Fuck, man. They can't even see all the good that I've been doing and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I'm fucking resentful at them, right? That's kind of how the world operates. But I set the ball rolling. I had a fear that I acted out on, the initial thing, and then there was fear, fear, fear. Every decision I made in that string or the train of fears brought me the misfortune that I felt I didn't deserve. You know, my fucking daughters are fucking mad at me again and they don't even see the good that I'm fucking doing. But really, when I unpack it, I can see that it was all me based in fear, right? And that's what we do around here. We unpack things to follow the breadcrumbs to find out where you made decisions based in self. Like there's a lot of people I work with that they're in these relationships that the relationships aren't going anywhere. They're fucking actually terrible relationships. And they keep blaming the other person for all the shit, right? So I'll use one of my relationships again because that's fucking, I got lots of experience with terrible stuff. You know, there was times in this one relationship that I should have gotten out of it. And I knew and I could feel that, but I never did. And then I'd go to my pillars and I'd be like, yeah, this is what's happening. Fucking, she's blaming me for this and she's blaming me for that. And fucking, but when I do the inventory, it's like, well, I know that I shouldn't be in it. So I'm dishonest with myself. Well, why don't I leave? Because I don't want to be alone. So I'm living in a fear. I don't want anyone else to have her because I think it's fucking my possession. So I'm being self-seeking, right? I'm being selfish. I'm living in all of the defects. And what it actually does, it makes me feel fucking terrible about me. And I don't have any like self-esteem or real self-confidence. And then I need relief. So then the porn comes on. Then the gambling comes on. Because I don't fucking feel good with me. So my ego needs fucking relief. So I gotta resolutely look for my own mistakes, right? And that's, you know, sometimes it's hard. Does anyone have any questions on fear before I keep going? So I did my list of fears in my first step 4. Some of you might have heard this story, but I wrote about 50 fears on my first step 4. I wrote, when we do this list, it's about all your fears, right? Just write all your fears down. Fear of fucking dogs, fear of fucking sharks, fear of heights, fear of, you know, common ones are fear of being alone, fear of being in a relationship, fear of not being in a relationship, fear of fucking, you know, failure, fear of success. Keep going.
Judgment.
Fear of judgment. Keep going.
Not getting what you want.
Gossip. Not getting what you want.
Not getting what you want.
And not getting what you want.
Not belonging.
Not belonging.
There's more. There's a lot.
So as we're listening to a lot of these fears, not belonging, not being accepted, blah, 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 a lot of those boil down to like self-worth issues, right? And that's what we're talking about. Most fears, like I've done so many step 5s. What I found over the hundreds of step 5s that I've done is most people have a self-worth issue. But because the pride is so thick at the beginning, people don't think they have self-worth issues because they've masked it with other stuff. But when you peel back the layers of this, your life and through these steps and then your own program, you'll get down to the bottom and you'll see that it's based in your own self-worth. You know, you're not good enough. You're afraid to leave a relationship because, you know, you're afraid that someone else might not get you or want you, right?
I used to think that I was afraid to lose the relationship because he's better looking than I am. Like it's that self-worth.
Right. Exactly. And as we make these decisions based on those selfish, self-centered motives, you don't ever feel better about yourself. And you keep trying to fill that God-sized hole inside of you with that relationship that doesn't fucking ever fill it, right? Which is why, you know, it's really important for us to stay single, at least for a while in recovery, 8, 10, 12, 14, sometimes 2 years.
Well, like you said, it's worth it.
It is.
It's a lonely road, yes, but it's so worth it because I'm able to be a mom.
Right.
You know?
And lots of people, they'll fucking write their safe and sound sex ideal, and let's just say it has 10 points. If it doesn't meet 7 of the points, it's fucking, you don't even entertain it. But the alcoholic and addict can rationalize and justify the most errant bullshit to suit their actions and their inaction in their life. So they'll meet somebody and it kind of starts off fucking good, pretty cool, and it meets like 3. It meets 3 out of the fucking 10.
They have yet hello.
Yeah, right? That's what, yeah, exactly. And then you start the lies. Then you're lying to yourself. Then you're trying to justify it to your sponsor, or you're not talking to your sponsor. Like, how many people get into these relationships and start not talking to their sponsor? Okay, I'm going to switch gears to some other kinds of fears. There's the fears of finance, right? We live in a world of material, and people get really scared of not having enough money, right? So we'll do all sorts of crazy things to make money, right? Some of us will do shady things in recovery on the side to make money. And that we know that that's not God's will, but we say to our sponsor, well, I fucking have to make money. So then we go against ourselves knowing that it's wrong so we can make this money. And then the guy doesn't pay you. And then you're fucking resentful at the guy. Even though you made a decision based on self and you knew you shouldn't have fucking done it. But there's the result of a decision based in self. Well, here's like part of that inner turmoil. As you like, maybe you don't get the job that you wanted. Maybe you have to take the job that you need right now. Maybe God's providing you with a job that's $15 an hour. Yeah, it's not the $25 an hour that you wanted, but you have an opportunity to take it. But why would someone not take it? Well, it's only $15 an hour. I don't want to make minimum wage. So now pride comes in. But what if God's building with you and doing with you as thou wilt, so he can teach you about fucking some kind of humility? Like, I'll tell you, my experience, I used to make like 15 grand a month for fucking 20 years. And when I came into recovery, I had no job. I had nothing, right? But I made a lot of money for a good portion of my life. And then I came into recovery, and I fucking couldn't get a job. I was fucking living on nothing, man. Like... And then, so I get this opportunity, I get a call from my buddy, and he's like, hey, this guy wants to hire us to cut lawns today. Are you free? And I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm broke. He'll pay us cash at the end of the day. So I fucking show up at this site, and, you know, there was other guys there working for cash, but I got there a little later, so there was a whippersnipper left, and there was a lawnmower left. My buddy took the lawnmower, so I got the whippersnipper. I don't fucking care. So I grabbed this whippersnipper and I started up and I start whippersnippering all these fucking sidewalks in this condo complex. And the thing with me, yeah, I'm a little whippersnipper. But the thing with me is I've run crews of 200 men. I've owned my own company. I've owned all that fucking equipment. I've owned like fucking tons of shit, right? But now I'm fucking whippersnipper for like $15 an hour. So I'm doing a good job, right? Fucking, and then this truck pulls up on this driveway, and I just thought it was someone that lived there. And the guy gets out and he fucking runs over to me and he whips this whippersnipper out of my hand. And he's like, you fucking can't whippersnipper. Go sweep the street.
What?
And I'm just like, he's like, you're scalping all of the grass. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm scalping the grass? He's like, you're cutting it too short. And you're fucking it all up. So I have to go and fucking sweep the street. So I'm humbled, right? Fucking pure humiliation. I'm a guy who's run big, huge crews. I've owned $1 million company. I've done all this shit. I just want to run a whippersnipper and make $20. And I can't even do that, right? So I fucking learned. And I just swept. And then, you know, the other part of the story is the guy paid us. He owed me $80 and he owed my buddy $80. And then he's just like, here's $100. You guys just split that.
Wow.
And I'm just like, are you fucking serious? So then my defects came out, right? Because I'm angry and violent. So I got right in his face. I said, you pay me the fucking $100 you owe us or I'm going to fucking kill you. So he paid me. But, like, this is in my first year, right? So give me some grace. And then in my second year, I fucking got a job. But what I had to do is so my company used to do ground frost removal for all different companies. And I knew all the owners, right? So I called up one of the owners of one of the companies. I said, hey, man. And I lied. I didn't tell anyone I lost my business. Everyone was wondering where my business went, where I went. But I called this guy and I said, yeah, my business, something happened to it. But now I need a job. So he's like, yeah, fuck, I'll give you a job. And I remember 20 years before, when I first started my business, I had this little dump truck. And it's everything's in the winter that I did. And it's like minus 30 or 40 outside. And I'm in my dump truck and I see these guys walking in these like deep trenches in these new subdivisions. And they're carrying like 6-inch conduit pipes and they're dragging them. They fucking all bundled up. And they're shoveling snow out of these ditches. It's just a shit job, right? And I'm watching these guys work, and I'm just sitting there in my truck going, fuck, thank God I fucking will never have to do that. I feel sorry for these fucking guys, right? 20 years later, I'm in my 40s. Guess what I'm fucking doing? That exact fucking job. And, I'm 40-some years old. I got to wake up at 4 in the fucking morning. And I get up every morning. This is exactly what I did. No word of a lie. I got up. And I couldn't even make enough money to pay my child support and my rent with that job. But I got up, I sat at the edge of my bed and I prayed. And I gave God gratitude for the job. I gave him gratitude for my life. And then I went and picked up my buddy and we went to work every day. And I fucking did that shit fucking job for like 8 months. And then I wondered, when's this going to get better? But I needed that. Creator knows what I need. Right? He knows what I need. So he's teaching me through the humiliation and the fucking pain. But most people are not going to do those jobs that I did. They're going to say, fuck you. I'm not fucking running this whippersnapper. Right? I'm not dragging these pipes and shoveling out snow at 40-some years old. I'll wait and get a fucking better job that I deserve. No, when God places you in a position, you fucking go and you do that. This is where people say, no, I'm too good for that. No, you're not too good. When you commit to God, build with me, do with me as thou wilt, you make the commitment and you fucking do what he puts in your path. And you learn the lesson out of that. And then finally I finished that job and then I didn't know what I was going to do. And I remember talking to a guy in recovery and I'm about 18 months now or maybe 2 years. And I'm like, fuck, dude. And I had a really deep sense of like shame and guilt. And like, I'm never going to get my fucking career back. Because I fucking burnt my life to the ground. And now I'm doing these kind of jobs. And I'm saying to him, dude, I have no job right now. I don't know if I'm even going to get my career back. Because there's no guarantees in life. And he said, dude, don't worry. Just fucking keep going, man. Just keep fucking trudging away. Something will break, man. Something will break. And then a week later, I got an offer to go to Morocco because I used to work for Jacobs Engineering. One of my bosses was in Europe and he asked me if I could go to Morocco. I'd make 20 grand a month. So I got that come up. And then I got another opportunity from an old boss that I worked for where it was in Calgary, but it was out in Saskatchewan. It was a Calgary-based company. It was $75,000 a year. So one was 20 grand a month, one was 75 grand a year. Most people are going to take the 20 grand a month job. Why? Because that's what we fucking do, right? But I had already learned not to do that. What I did is I prayed on it and I asked God, where can I be of maximum service to him and my fellows? And that was what actually made the decision on the job. And I took the job that was in Calgary, based in First Nations communities, putting homes up in First Nations communities. And 75 grand, honestly, still wasn't really enough to make all my ends meet because I had $2,100 a month in child support plus my rent and paying off my fucking bankruptcy and all my shit, right? But I did it anyway. And then what ended up happening is I got a lot of raises, I got bonuses, and fucking everything worked out. So the point to all that is you don't know what the fucking path is. You don't know what the plan is. Sometimes you got to be fucking humble. And it's your pride that's blocking you. And it's the pride that is always the main problem. And when you can identify pride, and most people, honestly, I don't find understand pride. Pride is anything that blocks God out. Anything. It's the ego. And ego stands for edging God out. And And if God's edged out, then you're not living in love. Living in love is living absent of ego. No, now I just work for God. I whippersnip over people's minds. I prune. So yeah, fear is like, it's powerful and it drives our whole lives. And when you guys are writing your list, you're going to write down a whole bunch of shit that is like nonsensical. Fear of like, dogs, and fear of fucking spiders, and fear. Write that shit down. Because what you're going to see is, you're going to see that God gave you some fear to actually live. Then he gave you a whole bunch of fear, or you're living in a whole bunch of fear that actually isn't even real. So for my 50 fears, 40 of them were fucking made up in my head, based on my need for validation, based on my instincts, and based on all this nonsense. But it drove 95% of all of my decisions in my life. So 95% of my decisions in life are based in self-centered fear. That I'm not going to get what I want, or I'm going to lose what I have. And when you start seeing that shit, it's a game changer. It's a game changer. And if you have any troubles with like identifying your fears, sit with your sponsor and talk about your life. Just start talking about your life. Because any alcoholic or addict that I talk to, any person actually in general, I can point out the fear that they had in their life in anything. Because everything's based on some kind of fear or another.
I think it's interesting, like you were saying, these self-centered fears are paralyzing. Like, we have a fear of getting the job, but we have a fear of not getting the job. We're so wrapped up in this self-centered fear that we can't even freaking move. And then we, act out, with drink or drug or character defects or whatever it is, these fears are so paralyzing.
Like, let's say you do get the job, and you finally put a resume in, and you finally had enough balls to go to the interview, and you got the job. You're so fucking happy, but now the next fear is like, fuck, I got to go to work Monday and start my job, right? Now what? What if they find out I'm fucking in AA? Or what if they find out about my fucking terrible relationship? Or like, what if they find out I don't know how to run Windows? Or like the fears just fucking, they start running everything.
Like that, the fear of somebody really knowing who I am.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's paralyzing. And we have to be rid of that shit.
Right. And the thing that we all want, right? The real thing that we want is we want people to know actually who we really are.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's the biggest fear that we're afraid of, right? And that's why it's so important to use God's power. Because left to our own power, we fucking fail because we act in the fear. You're going to worship one of two things. You're always going to worship one of two things. They're both unseen. You're either going to worship fucking fear, or you're going to worship faith. And the one with faith is like, okay, when you're sitting there and you're about to go into the interview, we all know this. If your sponsor says, okay, stop, pray for 5 minutes before you go into the interview. So you pray in your car and you're asking for God's strength and God's words and to accept whatever. And then you get that strength and you go in and you bang off the interview. Right? That's where God's power fucking comes in. Left to our own devices, we spin out of fucking control. And as we're working in all of these defects in whatever moment, when somebody's being fucking mean to us, we can stop and go, God, save me from being angry. I understand that this person is emotional, spiritually sick, and frequently wrong. Just like who? Just like fucking me. How may I be helpful to him? Then we turn it, right? We go from resentment to service. How can I be helpful to this guy? Maybe being helpful just means getting the fuck out of the way. But using God in all of this stuff is kind of what we're talking about, right? Using God in the moment. And that's where step 10 comes in. So in step 10 it says, we continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. The things that we're just learning about right here. When these crop up. It doesn't say if they crop up. It says when they crop up. It says we ask God to remove it at once. So we go to God and we ask him to remove the fear or selfishness, dishonesty, the lust, the judgment of somebody else, whatever it is. God, can you please remove this at once? Then it says we talk to somebody immediately. So then we pick up the phone. Especially when you're new and you're trying to get the shit working in your life. For anyone new, if you don't pick up the phone when you're struggling with fucking self, you're just setting yourself up for fucking failure. Because you're going to run the fucking show still and you're not fucking good at it. It's so important to pick up the fucking phone and be vulnerable and say, look, I'm fucking mad right now. And this is why. And then what happens in that phone call? Well, somebody calls me and I'm going to go back to step 4. It's a fact-finding, fact-facing process. I get to fucking look at the facts with him. We get to face the facts of whoever called me. Might not be his facts, because his facts is always based in his fucking selfish self-centeredness. Looking at the truth about stock and trade. And again, maybe not his truth, because his truth is based in his old patterns and belief systems. And it's an effort to discover damaged or unsaleable goods. Discard them promptly without regret. So we're trying to find these damaged and unsaleable goods that you're calling me for that you can't fucking see because you don't fucking have a clue of what you're doing. That's why it's so important for you to follow the directions so that you just follow the directions and the results are the results. But we're all taught to try to figure shit out. Oh, I'm going to figure this out. Oh, I'm in AA. I'm a little bit mindful. I'm just going to be nice. I'm going to go back to this guy and I'm just going to be nice. So what you're actually doing is you're self-willing the principle into the situation, but it's still based in self. And that's not what we're doing. That's the long way around. And typically you'll fucking probably drink before you make it around. So in that process, continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When they crop up, ask God. Boom. First sponsors God. And then we talk to somebody immediately. Doesn't say we wait. Doesn't say we wait for the weekend to pass. Doesn't say I wait till my kids are fucking in bed. Doesn't say any of that. It says immediately. And when you look up the word immediately, it's fucking right now. Following these directions is the key to success. Then we make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. So, quickly if you have harmed anyone. If you're following those first little bits of the process, you won't be harming people. That's a big if. Okay? And then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. So then in an admirably purposeful manner, you start praying for the other person's well-being. You start out with the problem of your own self and you finish it off with the solution of others. And all in there is God. Because God was in part of the process. My sponsor's guiding me back to God. And then I come out of that whole process and then it equals what? Equals the principles. It equals one of the spiritual principles or 5 of the spiritual principles. You don't need to come here, do the steps, and go out and just force the principles into your life. You do the directions, the principles are what the result is. But it might not be what you want, but that's the fucking point. In step 3, it says, are these not the things that he wants? It's not always your fucking outcome. My outcome wasn't fucking having Buddy whip a snipper out of my fucking whippersnipper out of my head. But I fucking didn't say anything. I tolerated. I learned my fucking lesson there. I fucking did that other job. I tolerated it. And I eventually grew to have gratitude towards it. Because I fucking knew that it was part of the journey and I was okay with it. But if I keep resisting everything, whatever I resist is fucking persisting. And it's coming back. The beatings continue till the lesson is learned. Right? The beatings will always continue. If you're the guy that keeps fucking arguing with people and you can't get along with people and you always drink out of anger, you're not learning your fucking lesson. If relationships are your problem and you keep fucking drinking because of a breakup in relationships and that's been your pattern for 10 years, which you fucking won't see until you do this shit, then that'll keep fucking persisting until you learn the fucking lesson. Well, how do you learn the lesson? You got to look at what drives it, the defects. Why are these defects driving my life? Well, my mom wasn't around. I didn't get my dad wasn't around. My mom and my dad actually treated each other like this. So I look for those same relationships in my life. My dad was mean to my mom. So I accept a guy in my life that's mean to me. So we repeat these patterns, right? But you can't see this shit in early recovery. It takes time, but you got to stay sober to even begin this shit. And by understanding that fourth column in the resentments, you can get a glimpse. And then as recovery goes on, the third column becomes way more fucking important. Because that's where the roots of it are. It's all driven by fear. Right? People have fear of speaking. Well, why? Well, because they weren't given a voice when they were kids. Right? A lot of people were just shh. Don't talk. Mom, I want this. You know what? Just go in your bedroom. Fuck, here's an iPad. Right? Some people fucking never got that fucking love from their parents, and they were just shoved into the corner. Or they spent their whole childhood in front of a TV and never got the love. Right? All these things matter. But when you think back in your life, well, my parents were pretty good. Well, they didn't beat me. They didn't do this. Did they give you love? Were they fucking on their hands and knees playing with you, looking in your eyes? Were they doing these things that kids need? Or were you looking for your validation in other ways? Were you acting out in bad ways to get attention from people when you were a kid? A lot of bad kids in school, they just do it because they didn't get it at home. And it's some type of attention. Any attention is good attention, right? At least people notice you. That's all we want. We all want to be validated and noticed. And then we do it in these self-destructive ways. And then we're afraid once we're noticed to lose what is noticing us. But sometimes what's noticing us isn't good for us. And then we can't let it go. Right? And I used this example before. Like sometimes, it's not a real example, but it is a real example. Like a lot of men have major issues in relationships with women. I get them when they're 40 or 50 years old. Well, what I find out by going back in their life is they found a porno magazine under their dad's fucking bed and then started looking at that. So, boom, began women as a possession and woman as something to serve the man. And then their cousins now they're jacking off to this fucking porno magazine and fucking, ingraining this fucking behavior more. And then he's 10 and now he's on the internet and parents aren't home. So now he's on fucking the websites looking at porn, disrupting his mind even worse, making women more of a possession, never engaging in actual talks with women, doesn't know how to. I just talked with a guy the other day. He's like, dude, I've been watching so much porn. He's like, I don't even know how to talk to women anymore. But that's what happens. So then he creates shame in himself because he doesn't have the ability to engage in a general conversation with a woman. And we need that. So he shames himself in his subconscious and then he needs to go gamble. And it creates all these fucking things. This is why we need God so much, because none of that shit's based in love. It's all based in fucking broken parts of us. And when you look at these fucking fourth column, and next week we'll look at the fucking sex relation issues and the fears, it's just all little symptoms of the brokenness. When we talk about God as we understood him, when did we understand God? When we were little kids. When we were whole, when we were fucking pure love. And then we went on the journey of life, and then we got fractured along the journey of life. And now the deal is here in recovery is to fucking heal those fractures and get back to that love. And it's not really by learning anything. It's looking at your inventory and unlearning the shit that you've learned. So, okay, so that almost finishes fear.
Never deal with fear, not kill him.
I'm just going to read this just to get through it, and then we'll shut it down. I'll touch base a little bit on it next week, but we reviewed our fears thoroughly. So we put them on paper. Even though we had no resentment in connection with them, we asked ourselves why we had them. So we got to ask ourselves why we have the fears once we list them. Wasn't it because self-reliance had failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem, or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. Perhaps there is a better way. This is the goal. For we think so, for we are now on a different basis. Because we've made a decision in step 3, we're trying to live on a different basis, okay? The basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves, because we can see that our lives run by us is fucking us. So we try to rely on this God, this love. We are in the world to play the role that he assigns. So no longer does it say I'm the actor. Okay, in step 3 it said I'm the actor trying to arrange the show. Now when I work with God, now I'm playing the role. I have a new employer. I play the role that God assigns. What's the role? Well, the role was I fucking worked in the trenches. When I'm with my daughters, I play the role as a father. When I'm here, I play the role as an instructor. When I'm at work, I play the roles. But in every single role, God is my fucking employer. So I try to bring love into every role that I play. And I'm no longer the actor, so I get vulnerable and I get honest. And I be honest and vulnerable. Because the actor is the one who hides behind the mask and everything. So it's no longer actor when we're relying on God. This is important. Just to the extent that you do as you think he would have you and humbly rely on him, does he enable us to match calamity with serenity. So just to whatever extent are you going to fucking let him do this? It's to what extent are you going to let God fucking run your life? Okay? Just to the extent that you do in that moment what you think he would have you do in that moment. And you humbly rely and you trust in God. Does he enable you to match calamity with serenity? Because we're the creators of calamity. God is the master of serenity. So to what extent are you going to do that in that moment? That's the question. Right? Some people are only going to do a little bit and then they're still fucking batshit crazy. You know how many calls I get from people that are fucking spinning out? I prayed to God. Yeah, well, this line becomes super important. To what extent are you going to fucking actually let him fucking handle this? It is good theory, but you're sitting here batshit crazy. You know, think God's a theory in this one. And then after these talks, right, then they fucking calm down and they're like, okay. And then they can try it again. And that's how self comes in, right? It comes in and starts fucking you up. That's why it's so important to fucking make those calls in that moment. Because after that call, that person's calm. But if they didn't make the call, they spin, man, for days. We never apologize to anyone for depending on our Creator. Never fucking apologize for depending on your Creator. And here's a good way to get over it. Pray out fucking loud in front of other people. Pray out loud in front of other people. Trust your fucking God, because everyone says they love their God and they fucking, God and them are tight, but you ask them to pray, they won't fucking pray. Why? Because they're scared of how they're going to be seen. You want to get through that fucking fear of being how you're afraid to be seen? You fucking pray in front of people to your God. It'll change your fucking life. We laugh at those who think spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. And it is. So we ask for Creator's strength in these situations, not ours. Okay? Creator's love, Creator's strength, Creator's forgiveness. Because left to our own, we can't produce what Creator can. So call on his. Don't say, God, give me the strength. Say, God, can I have yours? Can I have your love for this person? If you can't forgive somebody, don't worry about it. Your Creator is all loving and forgiving. Your Creator will forgive that person. So you ask Creator to forgive that person. And Creator's so tied to you down the road, you'll forgive them too. And as you forgive them, you forgive yourself. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let God demonstrate through us what he can do. Okay? We ask him to remove our fear. This is important. And direct our attention to what he would have us be. So when you're in a fear, you ask God to remove the fear. And then you direct your attention to what he would have you be. Not what he would have you do. What would he have you be? When somebody's fucking double barreling you with something, what would God have you be? Compassionate, tolerant. Through the being, the doing happens. And the being is always based in spiritual principles. So it's not like, show me what to do, show me what to be, based in spiritual principles. And the results are the results. And the doing comes naturally. At once we commenced to outgrow fear. We begin to outgrow fear. This is a process, right? It's a process. So we'll talk a little bit more about that before we start this relationship conduct next week, but let's shut it down. Who wants to pray? You're welcome. Thank you for tuning in to the UDRcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. The viewpoints and the opinions expressed today were solely of the individual sharing them. If you resonated with this episode, please follow us and share this link with anyone that may benefit from it. Please visit us at Billwardlife to see everything that we have going on. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time.